She was a powerful CEO. He was the janitor no one noticed. But when their quiet bond sparked a scandal, they didn't run. They built a revolution. Love, race, and resistance collided in a story that shook the city and dared to ask, what if being seen is the most dangerous act of all? Where are you watching from? Tell us in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories that make you feel, fight, and belong. I wasn't supposed to be seen. That was the rule I lived by. Head down, keep the floor clean, fix the pipes, replace the light bulbs. Leave before the sun remembers you. I liked it that way, or at least I told myself I did. Until the night she stood there, barefoot in her doorway, the only light in the hallway spilling from her office like gold leaking through a crack in the sky. Claire Whitmore wasn't someone you could ignore. 40 maybe, with that kind of presence that came from surviving storms and learning to walk through fire with grace. I'd seen her in the elevator a few times, always composed, always immaculate, but that night, she wore a midnight blue dress that looked like it was made from silence and smoke. It fit her like it had grown around her. She held a ceramic mug between her fingers like it was an anchor, and looked at me like she wasn't surprised I was there. "You think we could start right here?" she asked, voice low and warm like it had just rolled out of a dream. I froze, mop halfway through the corridor like my muscles had turned to stone. I wasn't sure she was talking to me. Nobody ever really did. Not in this building, especially not her. She didn't say anything else at first, just leaned her shoulder against the doorframe, bare feet curling against the tile. Her hair was loose, brushing her collarbone. Her eyes were tired, but they weren't hiding. They weren't afraid. They were asking a question no one had ever asked me before. Not with words, but with stillness. "You come here every night," she said, like she was recounting something intimate and obvious. "You fix things no one else notices. Clean messes no one thanks you for. But you see me." I looked down. "I'm not supposed to talk to tenants." "You're not a janitor tonight," she said. "You're a man who remembers what tea I like and leaves it by my door every Thursday. You don't flinch when I fall apart." I swallowed hard. That was a mistake. I didn't mean to see. "But you did," she cut in gently, "and you didn't look away. You didn't act like I was broken. You stood there like you were waiting for me to come back from wherever I'd gone." I didn't know what to say. Nobody had ever spoken to me like that, like I mattered without needing to prove I did. "I spend all day being in charge," she continued. "Everyone who talks to me wants something from me, or through me. But you clean up after the world without asking for anything back. And I wonder, when was the last time someone asked you what you wanted?" Her words didn't land like flirtation. They landed like prayer. I tried to hold on to the mop, tried to remember the wax pattern I was halfway through, but it was useless. She was undoing me slowly. Not with touch, but with truth. I tried to pull away with formality. "I just clean, Miss Whitmore." "Maybe," she said, taking one slow step forward. "Or maybe you're the one person in this whole building who isn't lying to himself about who he is." The hallway felt too quiet, like even the air had stopped moving. I looked at her. Really looked. She didn't look like a CEO. She looked like someone who had built walls and was now carefully, bravely opening a window. "I should finish the floor," I said. "You always finish the floor," she replied. "But you never stop long enough to be part of the room." I couldn't breathe. Not deeply. I had spent years being invisible on purpose, years perfecting silence. Now here she was, standing barefoot in the wreckage of both our masks, asking me to be real. "I wasn't sure I had permission," I murmured. "Well," she said, her breath just above a whisper, "you do now." She stepped back into her office, but didn't close the door. Later that night, in my shoebox apartment above McIntyre's barbershop, I sat on my old couch, the springs groaning beneath me like they were tired of holding me up. I didn't turn on the TV, I didn't check my messages, I just sat there, running that moment over in my mind. Her voice, the way her dress moved like it belonged to shadows, the way her eyes didn't ask for anything, just offered space. My mother used to say, "There's folks who see your back, and folks who see your eyes. Know the difference, son." That night, Claire looked me straight in the eyes, and didn't blink. The next evening, I showed up at 9 p.m., like always. Same cart, same uniform, same routine. But when I got to the executive floor, her door was open again, Inside, the light was soft, low. A lamp pooled warm yellow onto the table. 2 cups of tea sat there, one already steaming the way I liked it, with a sugar cube barely floating on top. I stood in the hallway like an idiot, afraid to believe it was meant for me. But she didn't call out, didn't beckon. She just moved around the room, adjusting the blinds, calm and barefoot again. Her dress tonight was slate gray, hugging her shape like she dared softness to win for once. "I wasn't sure if you'd come," she said without turning. "I wasn't either," I admitted. She turned then, handed me a cup without ceremony. Our fingers didn't touch, but something passed between us anyway, something heavier than contact. From 25 floors up, Boston looked like spilled stars. But in that office, time didn't move the same. It paused, maybe held its breath. Claire sat on the edge of her desk and looked at me like I was real. Not like I was a story or a savior, just real. "You ever get tired of pretending you're not in the room?" she asked. I raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "You're careful, Marcus. Every move, every word, like you're always measuring how much space you're allowed to take up." I said nothing. But damn, she wasn't wrong. "I see it," she went on, "in how you wait for elevators to empty before stepping in, how you hold your breath when the interns walk past, like you've already been told you don't belong, and now you're just trying not to be reminded." I let out a shaky breath. "I've learned it's easier that way." "For who?" I looked at her then. "For everybody." She swirled her tea. "And what about you?" "I don't make waves." She tilted her head. "But you leave ripples." I dropped my gaze. "I didn't come up here to talk about me." "Yes, you did," she said softly. "You just didn't know it yet." I finished my tea in one long sip and set the cup down. "I don't know what this is." "Neither do I," she said. "But it's dangerous." "Because you're who you are? Or because of what they'll say about me?" She didn't answer, just walked slowly to the window, her reflection in the glass soft, blurred, human. "When my husband died," she said, "they started treating me like I was made of glass. Beautiful, fragile, silent. But you're the first one who looked at me like I'm still solid." I didn't want pity. I didn't want to be her fix. But God help me, I wanted to stay. "I don't want to be a project," I said. "You're not. I don't want to be curiosity. You want truth." I looked up, she was facing me again. "Then stay," she said. "Just for tonight. No titles, no uniforms, no rules." And for the first time in years, I did. I stayed. I didn't knock the next night. Didn't need to. Her door was already open. I'd walked the whole building the way I always did. Mop wheels soft on tile, keys jangling faintly against my hip, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like mosquitoes that never slept. But something about tonight felt different. I wasn't moving on autopilot anymore. Every step toward her office felt like a decision, like a line I had already crossed. Claire was there, back turned to the door, adjusting the angle of the blinds with one hand, the other holding a cup of tea. The soft lighting brushed over her in layers, gold across her collarbone, shadow curling under her jaw. She wore a slate gray dress this time, sleeves long and fitted, neckline wide but quiet. Her hair fell in a loose wave over one shoulder, and she looked less like the CEO whose name was carved into glass downstairs, and more like a woman learning how to breathe again. 2 cups of tea sat waiting on the desk. Steam rose in little spirals like incense in a chapel. I stood for a second, caught in the moment between movement and meaning. Then I stepped in. My boots made a soft thud against the marble floor, but she didn't turn. "I wasn't sure you'd come," she said quietly. "I wasn't either," I admitted. She finally turned, and this time she smiled. Not the kind you give in boardrooms, but something smaller, something honest. "You're here," she said, handing me the cup. Our fingers didn't touch, but the closeness was enough to jolt something inside me. We stood there for a moment, neither rushing, sipping tea while the city hummed far below. The windows stretched out like a horizon line of stars, but all I saw was the light in this room. Claire walked over to her desk, sat at the edge like she had the night before, and looked at me as if waiting for the truth to arrive between us. "Do you ever get tired of pretending you're not in the room?" she asked. I blinked, caught off guard. "Come again?" "You're careful, Marcus," she said. "Every step, every breath, like you're afraid someone might notice you exist. You shrink." I didn't respond, not right away, because she wasn't wrong. "I've seen it," she said gently. How you hold the elevator door open, but wait to step in until everyone else is out. How you keep your eyes on the floor when the interns breeze past, like they own the hallway. I looked down into my tea. It's easier that way. For who? She asked. I didn't have an answer. Not one I could say out loud. Claire tilted her head slightly. You act like space belongs to other people, like you're borrowing air. I've been told, I started, then stopped. I didn't need to finish that sentence. We both knew how the rest of it went. She sipped her tea, quiet for a long beat. I get it, I've done the same thing, in different clothes. Doesn't look like it from where I stand. She gave a dry laugh. That's because you're looking at the finished product. You didn't see me when I started. When I was the only black woman in the room full of men who called me sweetheart before they knew my name. I see you now, I said, almost without thinking. Her eyes met mine, steady. That's what scares them. There was a shift in the air between us, not heavy, just charged. Like the silence was no longer empty. It had meaning. I sat across from her, still in my janitor's uniform, still unsure how I got here or why she kept opening this door. I didn't come up here to talk about myself, I said. She gave me a look, soft and knowing. Yes, you did. You just didn't know it yet. We drank our tea in silence for a while, but it wasn't awkward. It was the kind of silence that came with trust, with understanding. No performance, no posturing, just presence. Finally, I broke it. I don't know what this is. Neither do I, she admitted, but I know it's dangerous. Because you're Claire Whitmore? She smirked, but her eyes stayed serious. Because of what it'll mean for you. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. She knew the world would call me something long before they called me equal. She stood and walked toward the window, her reflection mingling with the city lights. When my husband died, she said, voice lower, they treated me like I was made of glass. Something fragile to be pitied. And I played along for a while. It was easier. I watched her from where I sat, the way her silhouette merged with the night outside. But then, she continued, you showed up, and you didn't look at me like I was shattered. You looked like I was still standing. You are, I said quietly. She turned back to me. So are you, even if you've forgotten how. I stood. The tea was finished. My shift was technically still running. The world outside this room would keep turning whether we admitted what was happening or not. This doesn't change anything outside that door, I told her. I know, she replied. There will be whispers, looks, maybe worse. I don't belong in your world, Claire. She stepped closer, close enough for me to feel the warmth of her breath. Then maybe it's time I stepped into yours. I didn't say anything, didn't move. Neither did she. The music started softly like it came from nowhere. A slow jazz track winding through the quiet, curling around us like smoke. Claire picked up a small black speaker from a side table, gave a small shrug like she'd forgotten it was even playing. I never thought I'd dance again, she said, almost to herself. You don't seem like the type. I'm not, she said, but I remember how. She stood there, not offering her hand, not demanding anything, just waiting, inviting. So I stepped forward. We didn't move much, just swayed, barely more than a breath, standing still in the middle of that office as the city blinked and breathed outside. It wasn't a dance, it was an agreement, to be present, to not shrink. Her head rested gently against my shoulder, not heavy, just real. You still scared? She whispered. Yeah, I said. Of what it means, of what we might lose. She pulled back just enough to meet my eyes. But we won't lose us. That night, we didn't kiss. We didn't promise anything, but I stayed, not as a janitor, not as a story, but as a man who, for the first time in a long time, chose to be seen. It didn't take long for the walls to start whispering. By Monday morning, something had shifted in the air. The building was quieter, but not in the usual way. It was the kind of quiet that happens right before a storm. Elevators dinged a little slower, conversations in the break room died when I walked by. The maintenance crew nodded less. Smiles became thinner, and I knew, without asking, that someone had seen us. Not what they thought they saw, but just enough. The photo came to light first, a blurry image posted on the company Slack, grainy, shot from down the hallway, just far enough to raise eyebrows, but not provide any truth. There I was, standing just inside Claire's office, handing her something. Could have been tea. Could have been nothing. The caption was simple, just snide enough to carry weight. Looks like CEO Whitmore has a new after-hours advisor. By noon, the post had been deleted. But not before it was screenshotted, saved, sent, and dissected in the digital underworld of whispered judgment. The building ran on three things: caffeine, deadlines, and gossip. And the latter now had a new headline. I found out about it the same way everyone else did. Someone didn't know I was behind them in the stairwell. Did you see the Slack post? Girl, I'm telling you, Claire's got a type. Please. They'll spin it into some mentoring initiative by Thursday. I kept my mouth shut and my head down, like I'd always done. But my hands were shaking when I keyed into the janitor's closet. That evening, I didn't expect to see her. I told myself I wouldn't stop by her office. Better to put distance between us before this thing got twisted into something it wasn't. But my feet didn't listen to my mouth, and when I reached the executive floor, I found myself pausing in front of her door. It was dark, no golden lamplight spilling across the tile, no tea on the desk, no music, just a silence that felt different now, emptier. I stood there for a long moment, unsure. Then I reached into the small side compartment of my cart, pulled out a cup of her favorite green tea, still warm, and set it gently on the floor beside the door. I didn't knock, didn't speak. I just left it there and walked away. 2 nights passed. The usual rhythm returned, cleaning, repairing, disappearing. But it wasn't the same. I moved through the building like a ghost that knew it had been spotted. The corridors that used to feel like quiet sanctuaries now felt like a stage with too many eyes and not enough light. Then came the meeting, Friday afternoon. Claire was in a pitch session when her assistant, nervous and twitchy, slipped her phone across the conference table. Claire glanced at the screen, didn't blink, then said calmly to the room, "Let's take 10. She stepped out into the hallway, heels clicking with purpose. HR had asked to speak with her, privately, which in corporate language meant, "We're not accusing you, but we're absolutely preparing to." She sat across from the HR director, a woman named Brenda, whose smile had the warmth of wet concrete. "There have been some observations," Brenda began. "Observations," Claire repeated flatly. "Yes, regarding professional boundaries with certain staff, particularly in maintenance." Claire crossed her legs and looked directly at her. "Are you concerned about tea or about skin tone?" Brenda blinked, clearly not expecting that. "I don't think it's appropriate to frame it that way," she said quickly. "Then maybe," Claire replied coolly, "you're not listening clearly enough." That night, I showed up like always, 9 p.m., cart in hand, heart in my throat. I didn't expect her to be waiting. Not after all that, but when I turned the corner near her office, I saw the cup of tea still there. Untouched. Cold. I stood in the hallway, staring at it like it was a message I couldn't read. Was she telling me to stay away? Was this her drawing a line, or had the world done what it always did, twisted something human into something shameful? I didn't knock, just moved on. But the silence clung to my skin like steam in a subway tunnel. Saturday night, I was at the laundromat off Tremont, folding shirts with the kind of mechanical precision that only comes from trying not to think too hard. My phone buzzed in my jacket, unknown number. I almost ignored it. Almost. But something in me said answer. "Marcus?" Her voice came through the line, soft, hesitant. "Yeah?" "I wasn't sure you'd pick up. Depends on the night." She laughed. It was quieter than usual, but it was real. "Well, tonight I could use some company." I didn't say anything. "And I don't mean your mop." That pulled a smile from me. "I'm off duty." "I'm not." There was a pause. "Front door's open," she said. "If you want to come in." I did. Her apartment wasn't what I expected. It wasn't glass and marble. It wasn't high-rise polish or curated aesthetics. It was warm, worn in, full of books stacked on chairs, half-melted candles and paintings in progress leaned against the walls. Claire was in leggings and a giant t-shirt, hair up in a messy bun, no makeup, no performance. "Didn't think you'd come," she said. "Didn't think you'd ask," I replied. She gestured to the coffee table. "I guessed Thai. Hope that's okay?" "You guessed right." We sat on the floor, backs against the couch, knees drawn up, boxes of noodles open between us. Miles Davis played low in the background. We didn't talk much, just ate, breathed. Then she spoke. "They called you a charity project." I stopped chewing. "Someone in the office, not to your face of course, but I heard it, enough times that it got back around." I didn't flinch. I'd heard worse in my life, but hearing it from her, that it had made its way to her ears, burned in a different way. She looked at me. I hate that more than I know how to say. You don't have to defend me. I'm not, she said. I'm defending us, whatever us means. I met her eyes. They don't see me, Claire, I said. They see what it means that you see me. Her voice dropped to a whisper, and that terrifies them. She poured 2 glasses of wine, handed me one. I spent years being perfect, she said. Sharp, controlled. Not to impress anyone, but because if I wasn't, they'd replace me with someone who smiled more and cost less. She held her glass up in a kind of sad toast. But you make me forget the performance. I looked into my glass. And what do I make you remember? She didn't hesitate, that I'm still allowed to want something. Just because it feels good, not because it's strategic, just because it's right. We didn't kiss that night. There was no grand declaration. We just sat on the floor, the city murmuring beyond the windows, 2 people caught in a storm that hadn't quite touched down yet, but it would. And when it did, we'd either stand together or be torn apart. I just didn't know which yet. The night didn't end with goodbye. Not anymore. It had been raining lightly when I left her apartment that evening, the kind of rain that barely made noise but coated everything in silver. I walked home slower than usual, my boots pressing soft echoes into the wet sidewalk. Something about her floor, her food, the way she'd looked at me when she said she was tired of performing. It clung to me like that rain. Not loud, just present. Just real. Over the next week, things didn't go back to normal, not for either of us. Claire stopped waiting by her office door, and I stopped pretending I wasn't glancing in that direction every time I passed by. Some nights, I left her tea. Some nights, I didn't. But what never changed was the flicker of warmth I felt when the hallway light spilled onto my shoulder from her open door, like a lighthouse saying, "You're still seen." Thursday night came. I was wiping down the glass conference table on the 12th floor when my phone buzzed in my back pocket. A message lit up the screen. "Claire, tea's already poured. Hope your hands are warm tonight." I smiled before I could stop myself. When I reached her office, she was barefoot again. Something I was starting to realize was less a choice and more a quiet rebellion. The room smelled like honey and sage. The lights were dimmed just enough to make the edges soft. She wore a deep maroon sweater, sleeves pulled down to her knuckles, and leggings that made her look less like a CEO and more like the artist she once told me she wished she could have been. "I guessed Jasmine tonight," she said, handing me a cup. "You seem like you needed something calming." "You're not wrong," I replied, taking it with a grateful nod. We sat on the floor this time, not the couch. The carpet beneath us was soft, worn in like it had heard every secret the walls couldn't hold. I leaned against the edge of her desk. She curled one leg under her and held her mug close. Neither of us filled the silence too quickly. "We didn't need to. You ever think about what would happen," she said eventually, "if we stopped pretending to be what they expect?" I glanced at her. "All the time. And I think they'd panic." She laughed, a soft, honest sound that filled the room like light. "I've built a whole world around expectations," she said, staring into her cup. "How I speak, how I dress, how I never flinch, even when someone's talking down to me in a meeting I called." I looked over at her. She wasn't hiding anymore, not even behind those smart, sharp words she was known for. Her voice cracked just enough at the end for me to hear the years it carried. "But the other night," she went on, "sitting on my floor with you, I didn't feel expected. I just felt allowed." She turned to face me, her eyes clear but vulnerable. "Is that weird?" "No," I said. "It's the most human thing I've heard all week." We drank in silence again, letting the truth settle between us. Then she said something that hit harder than I expected. "They called you a liability today." I blinked. "What?" "HR," she said. "It was off the record, but not really. They used words like optics and professional risk, said it wasn't about race, which of course means it absolutely is." I stared down at the tea. "So what now?" She looked at me carefully. "Now I ask you a question, and I don't want you to answer right away." I nodded. "If this keeps getting louder, if people start drawing lines we can't erase, would you still want to stay?" I didn't answer, not right away, because it wasn't just about me. It wasn't even just about her. It was about the space we were making together, a space that didn't exist anywhere else in that building or in this city. Maybe in the world. I don't know what this is, I said slowly, but I do know that I haven't felt this honest in a long damn time. She breathed in, deeply, like she'd been holding something back, and only now trusted the air enough to let it go. Me neither, she said. We sat there, side by side, backs against the desk, the steam from our mugs curling like threads weaving something quiet and strong. Later, when I finally stood to leave, I paused at the door. She watched me with that same steady expression she always had, not needy, not pleading. Just open. Will I see you tomorrow? She asked. Will you let yourself be seen again? I countered. She didn't answer, just smiled, small, tired but genuine. I didn't close the door behind me. The next morning brought fog and cold. Boston's version of a moody shrug. I was halfway through organizing a delivery at the hardware store when my phone buzzed again. Claire, no tea tonight. I've got a board dinner. Wish me luck with the wolves. I replied without thinking. Don't let them smell your mercy. Or your wine. 3 dots blinked, then disappeared, then reappeared. So, you are thinking about me. I stared at the screen, a laugh catching in my chest. Then I slid the phone back into my pocket and got back to work. That night, the building felt colder. Not because she wasn't there, but because she should have been. I moved through my route with my usual efficiency, but when I reached her floor, I stopped. The door was closed, but light glowed faintly from underneath. I hesitated, then knocked once. No answer. Inside, the room was empty, still warm. Still scented faintly with lavender and paper. Her shawl was draped over the back of her chair like she'd left in a rush. On the desk, a sticky note. Friday can't come fast enough. I read it twice, then slid it halfway under her teaboard so no one else would see. I left the tea anyway. By the time I got home, the city had settled into its usual late-night rhythm. Sirens distant, wind brushing rooftops, streetlights flickering like half-forgotten dreams. I didn't sleep much that night. I kept thinking about the way she looked sitting on that carpet. No makeup, no armor. Just a woman who dared to say she was tired, who'd spent years being perfect so she wouldn't be erased. And I realized I wasn't afraid of being seen anymore. I was afraid of not being seen by her. Friday didn't arrive with celebration. It arrived with fire. At 10:37 a.m., just as the office's elevators hit their mid-morning rhythm and the hum of keyboards had settled into the day's grind, an anonymous email slipped into every inbox on the company listserv. No greeting, no explanation, just a subject line. Who's cleaning up after Claire? Attached were 3 images. The first was the Slack screenshot from earlier in the week. Me, blurry, standing in the doorway of her office. The second and third were worse. Grainy photos taken from the street, both unmistakable. One of me walking into Claire's apartment building after dark. The other, far more intimate, showed her hand resting gently on my shoulder as we stood in her foyer. No kiss, no touch, but it didn't matter. The story had already written itself. The email had venom in its bones. Just 2 lines beneath the images. Nepotism or just poor taste? By lunchtime, the post was everywhere. It had been forwarded, texted, whispered through lips over lunch trays and Slack threads marked off-topic. And then it disappeared, scrubbed by the tech team. But the damage was already done. Claire found out mid-presentation in front of her creative team and 3 C-level execs. Her assistant handed her the phone like it was a live grenade. She looked once. Then again. Didn't flinch. She closed her laptop with quiet precision and said, "Let's take 10, folks." By the time I got the message, I was under a sink in an old chapel on Tremont, trying to stop a leak that had warped the floorboards near the altar. My phone buzzed with her name. I picked up immediately. "You saw it?" she asked. "Yeah," I said. "It's circulating fast." "They're calling it inappropriate now," she said. "HR says it's a liability issue." "Do you want me to stay away?" I asked. There was a pause. Long enough to let me wonder, long enough to hurt. "I want you to decide if that's what you want," she said. "I'm not ashamed of what this is, but I don't want you to pay the price for it alone." "Then don't disappear," I said, softer than I meant to. "I won't," she whispered. That night, I didn't use the service elevator. I walked through the front lobby, past the startled receptionist, past 2 interns who stopped mid-conversation. I walked the marble halls with my head high and my boots steady. I didn't look like a janitor. I looked like a man with somewhere to be. Her door was open. Claire stood at the window, her blazer slung over the back of her chair. Jazz played softly in the background. Coltrane again, the song we'd danced to. She didn't turn as I stepped in. "They want me to make a statement," she said, still facing the glass. "A soft one. Apologize. Deflect. Maybe step back for a while." "And what did you say?" I told them no. Now she turned. Her eyes didn't waver. "I'm not stepping back, not from my job, and not from you." That did something to me, made something settle deep in my ribs that had been rattling for years. "That's a big move," I said. "So was walking through that lobby with your head up," she replied. For a moment we just stood there, facing each other like co-conspirators, like people who'd stopped pretending the world was going to make room for them and decided to carve it out themselves. "So what now?" I asked. Claire stepped closer. Her heels barely made a sound. She stopped just inches away, her presence bigger than the room. "Now," she said, "we stand and we don't hide." I searched her face. "You sure?" "I've been hiding long before you ever showed up, Marcus. You didn't start the storm. You just made me stop pretending it wasn't raining. We didn't touch. Didn't have to." But when I left her office that night, I didn't feel like I was walking away. I felt like I was walking toward something. The fallout came quietly. No official reprimands, no press statements, just a series of subtle shifts that all said the same thing. Pull back or be pushed out. By Monday, a client postponed a pitch meeting. By Wednesday, a quarterly review was rescheduled without reason. By Friday, one of Claire's long-term accounts transferred to a firm in Cambridge. There were no emails that spelled it out. Just absence. A vacuum of support that stung like betrayal. Claire sat in her office late Friday night, her shoes kicked off, legs curled under her on the couch. The room was dark except for the city outside and a single desk lamp that cast her profile in gold and shadow. A cup of tea sat untouched on the table beside her. "They're backing away," she said when I entered. I closed the door gently. "Because of me?" "No," she said quickly. "Because of us. Because this doesn't fit their picture of comfort." I walked to the window, looked out. The mural across the street was lit up tonight, still vibrant, still defiant. "You're not thinking about backing down, are you?" She looked up at me, really looked. "Do I seem like the backing down type?" "No," I said, "but you seem tired." She nodded, almost imperceptibly. "I am, not from the work, from the pretending." "I know that feeling." She reached for my hand, not because she needed holding, but because she wanted to be held. "I built a reputation to shield me," she said, her voice low. "Turns out it was just a pretty cage." I sat beside her, let her lean her head on my shoulder. Let the silence fill in the cracks that words couldn't. "How do you stay steady?" she asked. "I don't," I said. "I just learned how to be still in the middle of noise." We stayed like that for a long time. The wind brushed the windows like fingertips. The jazz from earlier still played faintly from the corner speaker, looping endlessly. Finally, Claire pulled back. Her expression was no longer worn, it was carved from resolve. "I'm writing a letter," she said. "A public one." "An open letter?" She nodded. "To the people who think they can define me, and you, and whatever this is." I didn't speak for a moment, just watched the fire rise in her again. "Are you sure?" I asked. "I've never been more." "Then say what needs saying," I told her. "But don't do it for me." She looked confused. "What do you mean?" "Don't do it to defend me or protect me. I don't need saving, Claire. I just want standing next to." A small smile curled at the corner of her mouth. "Well then," she said, reaching for her laptop. "Let's stand." The letter went out 2 days later, not through the company's PR team, not as a polished press release. Claire posted it on her personal website, one page, plain black font, white background, her signature at the bottom. No photos, no scandal, just words, sharp and simple. "Some will call this rebellion," she wrote, "but rebellion implies chaos. What we're building is something else: structure, honesty, courage." If seeing a black man beside a white woman still stirs outrage in 2025, maybe the problem isn't the couple. Maybe it's the lens we still refuse to clean. It didn't take long to spread. Local blogs picked it up first, design magazines next. Then a late-night host read part of it on air. Suddenly, it wasn't just a messy office rumor anymore. It was a story, a conversation, a mirror held up to a city that liked to think it was beyond race and power and shame. And just like that, we weren't scandal anymore. We were a statement, but not everyone was ready to applaud. That Friday, I showed up at a job site in Beacon Hill. an old brownstone with a blown fuse box. The kind of place that smelled like lemon polish and money. A woman opened the door wearing pearls and a polished gray suit. Her mouth was tight, her eyes scanning me like a barcode. "You're from Carter Works?" she asked, arms crossed. "Yes, ma'am," I said. She stepped back just enough to let me inside. As I moved past, I heard her whisper into her phone, "He's here." I told you she was making a mockery of herself. I said nothing. I fixed the panel, checked the breakers, left the invoice on her marble kitchen counter. She never looked me in the eye. And I didn't flinch. Back in my truck, I found a new text waiting. "Claire, lunch at the studio. Bring paint hands." I smiled. The sun broke through the clouds just enough to make Boston blink. That afternoon, I met her at the storefront, a space she'd signed a lease for in secret weeks ago, before the scandal, before the storm. Half of it was already set up for her design firm, rows of samples, clean tables, renderings taped to corkboards. The other half was raw, drop cloths on the floor, exposed brick, canvases leaning against the walls. It smelled like sawdust and hope. "You're really doing this?" I asked, wiping sweat from my neck. "I didn't buy this to hide," she said. "I bought it so we could build something real." She walked across the open space, paintbrush in hand, hair tied up in a loose knot. She looked exhausted, radiant, dangerous. "You're not scared?" I asked. "Oh, I'm terrified," she said. "But I'd rather be terrified building something true than be comfortable living a lie." I looked around, at the bolts and blueprints on one side, the paint and color swatches on the other. It wasn't just a studio, it was a declaration. "All right then," I said, "let's build." In the weeks that followed, the rhythm changed again. Not loud, just steady, like rainfall. Carter Works and Claire's studio shared the space, two halves of something we hadn't even named yet. On one side, drills, wires, the smell of sweat and labor. On the other, palettes, brushes, and a wall that slowly started to bloom with color. We didn't throw a grand opening. We printed a flyer, taped it to a coffee shop window. Claire posted a photo on Instagram, her hands covered in red paint, mine holding a hammer. "Saturday Fix-It Day. Free minor repairs for seniors, veterans, and single parents. Come with a story or don't. Just come." The first Saturday, 5 people showed up. By the third weekend, we had a line. I called 2 of my old apprentices, Devin and Jalen. Sharp kids, hungry for more than just routine. They showed up with their toolboxes and no questions. Claire handed them brushes between drywall sessions, taught them how to paint a wall like you'd mend a broken heart. Slowly, honestly, without pretending it wasn't cracked first. A mural began to take shape on the interior wall. Claire sketched it one night after we'd closed. 2 hands, one dark, one light, building a bridge out of bolts and beams. Kids from the neighborhood helped color it in. They came every weekend, bringing their own additions, stars, names, sneakers, animals. No rules, no labels, just colors, just presence. One night after closing, I was rolling down the garage-style door when Claire handed me a sandwich wrapped in brown paper and a cold root beer. "You always feed the crew," I said. "You're not crew," she replied. "You're foundation." I gave a soft laugh. "That sounds heavier than I'm used to carrying." She leaned in the doorway beside me, her elbow brushing mine. "You carry weight like it's oxygen," she said. We didn't go home separately that night. Instead, we sat on the floor of the studio, legs stretched across paint-streaked tiles, sharing stories we hadn't told many people. I told her about the time my mom taught me how to rewire a lamp after the landlord refused to fix the lights in our apartment. I was 10. She handed me a roll of tape and said, "You fix the dark by touching it, son, not by waiting for someone else." Claire told me about a gallery that once offered to buy her painting, but only if she left her name off it. Said her work was too urban for their walls. She laughed when she told me, but there was something in her eyes that didn't laugh with her. We didn't kiss. We didn't have to. Sometimes intimacy is sitting close enough to hear someone breathe and not needing to fill the silence with anything but breath. Then came the next challenge. An email. Anonymous. Sent to the local press. CC'd to the city business registry and Claire's board. Photos again. One of her painting the mural with the kids, one of me holding a drill. The tone wasn't cruel, but it was pointed. Are these the optics Williams and Carter want to be known for? Charity as branding? Romance as rebellion? Should professionalism come second to performance? Claire read it in silence. Jaw clenched. I looked over her shoulder, reading each line like bullets. They're trying to dress judgment up as concern, I muttered. She folded the printout, looked at me. I can make a statement, I said. Or I can step back, give this room to breathe. Her eyes flared. She stepped toward me. Don't you dare. I blinked. Don't you dare let them shame us into silence, she said, her voice low but firm. This isn't about a photo. It's about people who've built their comfort on watching others stay small. You said you didn't need saving, I reminded her. I don't, she said. But I need partnership, and partners don't hide. I exhaled, long, steady. Then what do? Claire turned toward the mural, toward the half-painted hands. We paint louder, she said. So we did. That Saturday we rolled up the doors. A local nonprofit podcast came to record. We didn't prepare a speech. We didn't rehearse. Claire told the story of the kids who kept showing up. I told them about Miss Eleanor, the veteran who made us tea and taught the kids how to sand window frames. When the host asked what made us different, Claire said, we don't build for applause. We build because people deserve to feel safe where they live and seen where they stand. That story aired on Sunday. It didn't make headlines, but it was enough. Enough for a woman in Roxbury to handwrite a thank you note for fixing her mother's heater. Enough for a retired mechanic to drop off a box of tools. Enough for 3 boys from the next block to show up the following weekend with matching shirts and ask, can we help? That night, as I turned off the studio lights and Claire packed up brushes, she looked at me and asked quietly, you still scared? I didn't lie. Yeah, I said. Of what this means, of what it'll cost. She walked over, leaned her forehead gently against my chest. But we won't lose us, she whispered. And I believed her. Not because she promised it, but because every single day she kept choosing it. So did I. The storm didn't come with thunder. It came with a name. I was in the back office sorting drill bits when Claire called out to me from the sink, her voice low, sharp. I came around the corner, wiping my hands on an old towel. She stood there, her fingers still wet with blue paint, her eyes locked on a file in her hand like it had whispered something vile. Marcus, she said, we've got company. She held out the folder. I took it, thumbing through the pages. Property maps, lease outlines. A glossy proposal with corporate branding I didn't recognize at first. Then I saw the name at the top, Walter Crenshaw. I looked up. That name's familiar. Claire nodded. Real estate magnate, owns half the block now, including the Carter Works property. I felt a heat rise under my collar. He's offering to buy us out, she continued. Says the studio and your shop sit on prime commercial frontage. Wants to elevate the neighborhood's potential. She made air quotes with her paint-streaked fingers. His words, not mine. What kind of offer? Generous, she said, with expedited termination of lease and a compensation package. And what's he really after? She turned back to the window, her voice softer now. Visibility. We made too much noise. Now we're inconvenient. Outside, the mural gleamed in the late afternoon sun. The 2 hands, one dark, one light, stretched toward each other across the wall, surrounded by stars the neighborhood kids had painted. Claire watched it for a long beat. He wants to paint over us, she said quietly. I stood beside her. Not unless we let him. The next day, Crenshaw showed up in person. He didn't schedule a meeting, didn't call ahead. He just arrived in a sleek black SUV wearing a navy suit that probably cost more than our rent for a year, and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. His assistant trailed behind him, a young woman with a tablet and eyes that never lifted from the floor. Claire met him at the front of the studio in overalls, paint fresh on her cheek, her curls pulled into a bandana. I don't do suits on weekdays, she said flatly. Crenshaw chuckled like it was a joke. Miss Whitmore, you're a remarkable woman, and frankly, this community is lucky to have you. But you've got to think bigger. He gestured broadly, like a magician preparing for a trick. This space, your vision, could be the flagship of something larger. Picture it. Galleries, press, your name in lights. I don't want my name in lights, Claire replied, not missing a beat. I want kids on this block to know that hands, black hands, brown hands, can build beauty that doesn't need permission. That was when I stepped out from the back. No smile. No words yet. Just presence. Crenshaw straightened. His eyes flicked to me. Ah, Mr. Carter. Still tinkering, I see. I fix things, I said evenly, and I recognize rot when I smell it. He clapped his hands together once. Well, I see where this is going. He adjusted his cufflinks, his tone sharpening. Real estate is a machine, he said, and sentimentality doesn't slow it down. If you're still here in 30 days, you'll be here illegally. Then he turned and walked out, his assistant hustling behind. The silence left in his wake was heavier than concrete. Claire looked at me. He's not bluffing. No, I said, but he's betting we will. That night, we sat on the roof of the studio. The skyline blinked around us, and the mural below glowed faintly from the street lamps. Claire pulled her knees to her chest, her breath fogging in the night air. You ever lose something you fought for? She asked. I nodded slowly. Yeah, my mother's house. After she passed, the city sold it over unpaid taxes. She'd lived there 38 years. Claire closed her eyes. I won't let that happen here. Neither would I. The next morning, Claire marched into City Hall like she owned the place. She didn't go alone. 6 elders from the neighborhood came with her. 2 veterans from the Fix-It crew. And Miss Eleanor, 81, fire in her bones, rolled herself right up to the permits counter and announced, "This is a protest. We brought snacks." They filed a motion for historic designation, using the mural as a cornerstone of community heritage. They submitted affidavits from kids, seniors, business owners, all testifying to what the space had become. Not a brand. A home. A memory. Crenshaw fired back with lawyers. Fancy ones, armed with folders and threats. They spoke in phrases like commercial interest and redevelopment clause. We answered with people. A week later, the podcast host came back, this time with a documentary crew. Local news ran a segment titled, "The Studio That Refused to Disappear." One night, Claire found me in the back by the loading dock, gripping a letter in my hand. "They froze our account," I said, my jaw tight. "Pending investigation. Something about zoning violations and safety hazards, all fabricated." She scanned the letter, her knuckles whitening. "This is war," she said. I nodded. "And it's just getting started." But she wasn't scared. She walked up to me, placed a hand on my chest, right over my heart. "They want to bury us," she whispered. "But they don't know we're the roots." We stood like that for a long time, the street below pulsing with life, the studio dark behind us, but still standing, still ours. And in that silence, something passed between us, older than fear, deeper than defiance. Not just love, not just anger, not even just pride. Legacy. The next chapter wouldn't be about surviving. It would be about declaring in every brick and brushstroke that we had never been invisible, and we weren't going anywhere. Dawn came hard the day the city posted the notice. Claire stood in front of the mural, arms crossed, hoodie drawn tight against the chill. Her breath curled visibly in the cold air, her eyes locked on the paint-streaked wall. Behind her, the studio sat dark, its front door chained shut, a laminated paper slapped across the glass. Closed until further notice, pending municipal review. But the mural, it was still there. Still loud, still radiant. The 2 hands, one dark, one light, still reaching across that wall like they'd always been there. The kids that stars still dotted the space between. And beneath them, in quiet resistance, a message sprayed last night in red. "We are still here." I joined her without a word, 2 styrofoam cups of coffee in hand. She didn't turn when I approached, just reached blindly for the one she knew was meant for her. "They're setting the hearing for Friday," I said, voice low. Her eyes never left the wall. "You ready?" "I was born ready," I muttered. She turned then, just enough to meet my gaze. "He's got lawyers with last names longer than our lease." "I know," I said. "That's why we won't fight him alone." By noon, the alley behind the studio had filled with chairs, folding tables, and something fiercer than protest, presence. Miss Eleanor rolled in wearing a black beret and a March on Washington button. Devin handed out bottled water, while Jalen strung up a banner that read, "This place is not a product, it's a promise." They weren't marching, they were testifying, just by showing up. Kids brought sidewalk chalk and wrote names on the bricks. Someone played an old gospel tune on a beat-up keyboard. A mural panel was set up by the fence, blank at first, but soon filled with stories and color. A boy painted his grandmother's rocking chair. A girl painted her father's steel-toe boots. An old man drew the USS Mason, the first Navy ship he served on, sailing through cobalt waves. Nobody directed it, nobody planned it. It just happened. Like healing does. Claire watched it all unfold, her arms folded, her face unwritable until she heard my voice behind her. I used to walk past this mural after midnight, I said to the small crowd now gathering around. Never thought anyone noticed it, but one night, she left the lights on. I turned slightly to Claire, and I realized it wasn't the paint that made it matter. It was the way she saw the people who built it. The alley was silent. Then Claire stepped forward. "There's power in building something with your own hands," she said. "But there's more power in saying no when someone tries to take it." The applause wasn't wild. It was grounded, certain, the kind that came not from agreement, but allegiance. But the storm wasn't over. That night, Claire found a plain envelope slid under her apartment door. No return address, no handwriting, just 3 printed photos. One of her walking home, alone. One of me locking the studio gate. And one of the mural, half covered in black spray paint. No note, no threat, just proof, just presence. She called me the second she saw it. Her voice was steady, but her hands were shaking. I knew because mine were too. "I got one too," I told her. "Same photos, same silence." "They want us rattled," she said. I sat on the edge of my couch. "It's working." She didn't argue, she didn't tell me to be strong. She just said, "Only if we let it." That night, neither of us slept. Claire pulled out an old notebook, sat at her kitchen table, and started writing. Not a press release, not a speech, a list. Names, faces, memories. Every child who'd ever helped paint, every elder who'd ever brought a chair, every repair, every laugh, every tear spilled inside those walls. She filled 10 pages before dawn. By the time Friday came, the sky was gray and flat and cold enough to sting. The hearing was held in a municipal building that smelled like old carpet and cheap coffee. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead like insects that wouldn't die. Crenshaw arrived with a full legal team in tow, matching suits, leather portfolios, smugness polished to a mirror shine. Claire and I walked in with no attorneys, just people. Miss Eleanor sat in the front row, wrapped in a scarf that said, "Still here." The kids took seats in the back. One clutched a crumpled drawing of the mural. Another held a screwdriver like a badge. The attorney spoke first, calculated and polite. Commercial potential, economic uplift, new jobs. Every phrase sounded like it had been dry cleaned before delivery. Then Claire stood. No podium, no papers, just her voice. "I don't have slides or spreadsheets," she said, "but I have stories." And one by one, people stood beside her. The war veteran who found community again. The teenage girl who stayed off the streets because of the painting classes. The mother who said her autistic son spoke his first full sentence during music circle in our studio. Each voice layered over the next, like a song with no chorus, just growing verses. When it was done, the room was quiet. Even Crenshaw looked smaller. The council recessed. "Decision to be announced Monday," they said. Outside, the air was damp and heavy, like it couldn't quite make up its mind whether to rain or snow. Claire stood beside me, her arms loose, her shoulders no longer drawn tight. "We showed up," she said. "We always do," I replied. She looked at me then, not like a CEO or a symbol, but like a woman who'd just remembered how to breathe. "Thank you," she whispered, "for not walking away." "Wasn't an option," I said. But across the street, in the shadow of the bus shelter, a man stood watching us. He wore a long coat, a phone pressed to his ear. No expression, no blink. We didn't see him that day. Not then. But we would. Because some storms don't pass. They just wait. That weekend it rained, a slow, soaking kind of rain that made the whole city seem quieter than usual. Claire sat by the window of her apartment, one hand wrapped around a cup of coffee, the other drawing slow circles in the condensation forming on the glass. She wasn't watching the street. She was listening. To silence. To memory. To the sound of a man's voice that refused to be washed away. And somewhere out there, someone else was listening too. Waiting, but so were we. Not waiting to be rescued. Waiting to be counted. Waiting to be heard. And knowing this time, we wouldn't have to wait alone. Thank you, truly, for staying with us through every quiet moment, every whispered threat, and every act of defiance in this story. If you're still here, it means something in this journey stirred something in you too. What did we learn from Marcus and Claire? That being seen, fully, unapologetically, is a radical act. That love doesn't have to shout to be strong. That community is not built by grand gestures, but by the small, consistent choice to show up. And perhaps most of all, we learn that sometimes the most powerful kind of resistance is simply refusing to disappear. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or your heart in the comments. We'd love to know how far this story has reached. And if stories like this move you, remind you, or simply make you feel less alone, hit that subscribe button. There are more voices, more truths, and more stories coming your way. Until next time, stay bold, stay present, and don't ever let the world paint over you.